Welcome to the Making Black America Black Visionary series from WEAA. We are excited to be here with you and to another installment of our series. I'm joined now by Larry Gibson, a law professor, lawyer, political organizer, historian, well-known Baltimorean. He currently serves as the professor at the Francis King Carey School of Law in the University of Maryland, Baltimore. He currently serves as counsel for the firm of Shapiro, Scher, Gilnoth, and Sandler. He was the principal advocate for the legislation that renamed Maryland's major airport, the Baltimore-Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport, and he published Young Thurgood, the making of a Supreme Court justice back in 2012. He's now working on a new book about Thurgood Marshall. Attorney Gibson, how are you, sir? Thank you for joining us.
I am fine. I'm feeling good. When you get to be 80 years old and you're healthy, that's a blessing.
You're still here. Well, Professor Gibson, I want to start by asking you about your career in education. You're now in your 51st year of educating the country and maybe even the world's top attorneys under your tenure as a law professor. What do you hope that they do to carry your legacy, your teaching, some of the ideals you instilled in them forward?
Well, I really enjoyed this. As you've indicated, I've been teaching law for 51 years, and every year my students are the same age. I have simply enjoyed that. People 22, 23, 24 can't fool me. I know this age group frontwards and backwards. So I've learned about them, and I've learned about that, and I'm just plain proud of what so many of them have done. I follow their careers, I follow the growth of their families, and one of the things I really enjoy now is when I teach multiple generations. Every class now, by asking, is there anyone here whose mother or father I've taught? I'm aware of 29 situations where I taught the parent and the child. There are probably others because it's only in about the last 10 years I've started asking that question. There is a joke about a friend of mine that who has a daughter in high school now, who I taught the mother and the father. I'm going to keep teaching until I teach 3 generations, but I'm not sure that'll happen.
Oh, that's delightful.
So, it's been a delight, and I appreciate them allowing me to have some small impact.
What is interesting is that you started with your first political campaign back in 1968. And 68 was a big year. That was the year, of course, that Dr. King was assassinated. It was a year that we saw the Fair Housing Act. It was a year where the country was dealing with the impact of the Kerner Commission, which only put into words what we all knew to be true, that we were two nations deeply divided on the basis of race. And we've come forward in so many ways, where we've had the first African-American president and we've had the first woman of color as vice president, but we're still dealing with the first. I mean, we are at the point where we are potentially getting ready to elect, hopefully, the first African-American governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, who's a candidate for the Democratic, for the Democratic side. Can you talk a little bit about this campaign and why is it that we're still at first?
Well, first, if not, you are absolutely right about 1968. I got out of law school in 1967, and the first year after that, I clerked for a federal judge. I was the first Black to clerk for any federal judge in the South. And I had an offer after the clerkship to work for one of the largest law firms in Baltimore, which there'd never been a Black lawyer in one of the mainline law firms. This was Venerable Bachman Howard. But during that year, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And everybody reacted in some way strongly to that assassination. There are people who left the country. There are people who started various organizations. The people who their artistic expression, singing or paint or music, was affected by it. My case, it changed my career trajectory. I decided that I was not going to work for the establishment. That was my word back then for it. I simply asked, what's the largest Black law firm in town? That literally is what I asked. And I joined the firm of Brown, Allen, Murphy, Watson, Russell, and never regretted it after that. That was 1968. And I expected to be a practicing lawyer for the rest of my career. But then one day in 1970, I got a from a former law professor of mine at Columbia University, Professor Monrad Paulson, who had been appointed Dean of the University of Virginia Law School. He called and said, Larry, I'm on my way to Washington, D.C. by train. I'd like to get off in the train in Baltimore, speak with you about a matter, and then continue and finish up my journey to Washington. Could you meet me at the train station? I agreed to meet him. I was pleased to hear from him. Hadn't seen him for a few years. When he got off, we met. He says, you know, I've been appointed the Dean of the University of Virginia Law School. I'm the first Northerner to ever be appointed Dean of that law school. And there's never been a Black professor at the University of Virginia or any predominantly white law school in the South. Would you consider changing your profession to teaching? Had given any thought to this. I told him I need a little time to think about it, and decided to try it. I started in 1972 part-time, and then in 1971, I began my teaching career at the University of Virginia, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And I continue to practice somewhat. My law partners say I don't, but I insist that I do. And I've, of course, have witnessed an awful lot, a lot of change. My other reaction to the death of Martin Luther King was to begin political organizing. My first political campaign was a campaign that elected a Black judge, the first time any African American had been elected citywide in the city of Baltimore. And I've seen a lot of change and improvement. Of course, this was soon after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and now I just watched the newscast yesterday. I think flood damage, where the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, is African American, is a Black person. And I taught, by the way, as a visiting professor in 1975 in Ole Miss, and so I've seen what I consider to be an awful lot of progress. And of course, I'm delighted in living through the presidency of Barack Obama. I frankly had no expectation to live to see that. And now I am, if I live in a couple more months, I'm going to see Wes Moore become the mayor of, the governor of Maryland. There's not been enough of this, but to someone who spent most of my years at a time when most African Americans couldn't vote in the Deep South, I do recognize the progress, and I'm appreciative of that.
Well, I'm so glad that you're here, and that, you know, the hope is that you'll still be around as we get Wes Moore through, because we still have so many more rooms that we need to open up for Black folks. I mean, you know, the governorship, of course, here in Maryland, we want to see more Black women in positions of power. We want to get a Black woman into the White House as president. So we got more work for you to do, Professor Gibson. We're seeing a very interesting time. So you're seeing all these things happening, but at the same time, this moment where the FBI raided former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago property. Like, we were sitting there as someone who's not a lawyer. You know, my law knowledge is Law and Order SVU. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what is happening here. Can you talk a little bit about what that portends for American politics, with the FBI now raiding a former president's property and possibly talking about the next level in terms of indictments?
Well, it means that we have a government, a national government now, that has the courage to do that. That certainly would not have been the case just a few years ago. We have a Justice Department that means much more about justice than we'd had even just quite recently. I'm encouraged by this. I understand the trauma that people who grew up believing that this was, in their view, and to be a white-dominated country, the trauma that some of them are having to adjusting to the realities of this multiracial society, and some of them are going to react negatively. Most of it's out of fear. So I sort of understand them and have pity for them, but I'm encouraged by the fact that at least in the federal government, we're starting to see the FBI on our side. You know, that's but that wasn't the case always. I mean, just think of this. As we speak, the head of the military, the Secretary of Defense, is an African American. As we speak, when a news conference is held at the White House, a Black woman steps to the mic and is the spokesperson. Right now, when the U.S. is represented at the United Nations, it's an African American woman who is the spokesperson there. Just think of the Department of the Interior being headed by a Native American. That was the department the Bureau of Indian Affairs set up to oppress Native Americans. And so we don't have all the changes that we are needed, but to an old dude who's seen it when it wasn't so like it is now, we may not be where we want to be, but we sure ain't where we used to be.
I heard my dad say that in church, right? That an old Negro preacher said, we ain't where we used to be, and we ain't where we want to be, but we definitely are moving on this path to becoming more self-actualized in this country. You were right. Watching Karine Jean-Pierre speak for the president and stand up there, and just watching Black women and waiting for that day, that was the first Monday in October, when Sister Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is going to walk out in that Black robe. That we are seeing history before our eyes, but you've seen a lot of history. That's what I think about when we look at the Black Visionary series, the history that you have. One of the things I think that inspires me the most about your work, and there's so many things that do, but I'm a graduate of Lincoln University, Pennsylvania, which of course is the same university that Thurgood Marshall attended. So I remember hanging out at Thurgood Marshall dorm, because all the guys lived there. So we know that's where we hung out, at Thurgood Marshall dorm, but also learning about Thurgood Marshall because I grew up in Washington, D.C. Here you are, where you have the book, Young Thurgood, you're working on another book about Thurgood. You made sure that there's a Thurgood Marshall Hall at Morgan State University for students. And then, of course, what I think is one of your greatest legacies, you may not agree, but having that airport renamed after him, that years and years to come. Oh, like it's amazing to think that when people land there, I always when I have to travel, I will tell you, Professor Gibson, I'm like, if I have to choose between Reagan and Marshall, I'm always gonna land at Marshall. I'm not gonna go land at Reagan. So can you talk
Very,
about that work?
that is one of the things that I'm proudest of. I remember when the idea was originally raised by now recently deceased Delegate Emmett Burns. Uh, I've been trying to do different things to make sure that Thurgood's contributions were remembered. By that time, I'd gotten a law school library named after him. We had really worked hard to get a statue of Thurgood erected near the federal courts. But I said, let's try to get the biggest thing the state owns, which is the airport, Thurgood Marshall. And it took one session of the General Assembly, an awful lot of work, and it came really really close to not happening. It actually ultimately passed 2 hours before the end of that year's legislative session. And if it hadn't happened then, it may never have happened, because they passed a law that stops anyone from doing what I did, was just like, ramrodding it through the legislature. There is this naming commission. You've got representatives of the House and the Senate and the governor. It takes a while to name something big for someone now. But back then, it just took an act of the General Assembly. And I've gotten it easier through the House. The original proposal was for it to be Thurgood Marshall BWI Airport. And that's how it got it passed in the House. But the Senate would not go along with that. The airport people convinced them that they had built so much around the name of Baltimore, Washington, appealing to the Washington market. But we were able to get it through the Senate, as rather than the House version was Thurgood Marshall BWI, the Senate, we did get through BWI Thurgood Marshall. But unless the two bills were identical, there was not going to be any legislation at all.
Okay.
Didn't get either house to back down until the final day, 2 hours before what we call sine die, the end of that legislative session. The House went along with the Senate version. I was up in the gallery. Delegate Burns turned around to me and gave me a thumbs up when that occurred. So yes, I'm very much very proud, quite proud of it.
I think people don't really understand, particularly young people today, they don't really understand the impact of seeing history. I remember when the night they were announcing Barack Obama as the winner for the first time, and calling my grandmother. And she's like, I've been on my face praying Barack Obama through. I don't think people understand that the history that you're seeing now, which young people take for granted, right? I mean, in years to come, they're going to take Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson for granted. We understand, and really you do, and my father understand what it meant to go from Thurgood Marshall to Clarence Thomas, and what we lost in that voice. Young people take for granted President Barack Obama and his family. You know, from the days of Nixon and Reagan, to get a Black man in that position, like, you have the long eye of lived history. When I talk about Emmett Till, it's a story my father told me. When you talk about Emmett Till, you were there. You know the way it changed Black mothers in this country. So if you can just look back over your life for us, just for a moment, and you think about kind of a pivotal moment that you're like, if I had to go back and write my next book, like, this is the moment that I think we should be talking about, what would that
Well, you've mentioned a couple there. Very good. I mean, Barack Obama was elected, for about the first half year, I would tell my wife daily that I'm going to live this day for a particular person who had someone who never got to see that. My first campaign was for a man named Judge Joseph Howard. He would have loved to see this. I says, I'm going to enjoy this day for Joe Howard. I enjoyed the Barack Obama legacy because I didn't even care when they criticized him. When they had to say Obama, I said, well, who, President Obama? I didn't care what they said. They had President Obama. I enjoyed and reveled in that entire 4 years. But prior to that, there were other really important milestones. Thurgood Marshall was becoming a member of the Supreme Court. That happened in the same year that I became a lawyer. I became a lawyer in '67. He joined the Supreme Court. So I just, of course, had a special interest in him. This was a Baltimorean who had joined the Supreme Court. So I just fascinated with that. And then when I got the opportunity to meet him, I just took and created an opportunity to meet him. I was representing the school superintendent of Baltimore, who was in the process of being fired. And I was trying to slow it down, Roland Patterson. So I wanted the Supreme Court to get involved in this case and to at least prevent a proceeding that was about to happen that was going to fire Dr. Patterson. So I went over to find Thurgood Marshall. And I had his address, but I kept getting lost. I could find this house. There wasn't GPS back in 1975. I finally get in front of this man's house after 11 o'clock. Back then, there was no Secret Service or other protections for Supreme Court justices. You could just go up to their door and knock. I did. Well, I paused for a minute. There was another lawyer with me. I said, I'm actually going to go and ring the bell of a justice of the Supreme Court after 11 o'clock. I said, look, it's taken us 3 hours to find this man's house. The worst he could do is slam the door in our face.
Right.
The two sons came first. We asked to speak to the father. Then he came. He was in his bathrobe. And I remember the very first words that Thurgood Marshall ever said to me. Counselor, this had better be a criminal matter. I responded, no, Mr. Justice, it is not, but it is about Baltimore. I didn't know what his going to be reaction. He said, okay, come on in. Mm-hmm. He dealt with the legal matter in about 10, 15 minutes. He said, okay, I'm going to sign this order, but you know, the Chief Justice is going to knock it out tomorrow. But he knew what I wanted was a nice media hit about the matter and a temporary stay, which I got. But I didn't get out of his house until after 2 o'clock in the morning. For over 2 hours, he just entertained us with one story after the other about growing up in Baltimore and living in Baltimore. From that point forward, I was smitten about Thurgood Marshall. And so just his period of time on the court was a high point. And there are others. There are others outside of the legal realm, certain decisions. So yes, I've seen an awful lot of change, a lot of improvement. We've still got additional work to do, but I defy anyone who says that there's not been dramatic change. I repeat that if there's a White House press conference today, step into the mic will be a beautiful Black woman named Jean. So absolutely, there are lots of things that are like that have happened over time, and I just feel fortunate to have lived long enough to see them.
My last question to you is one that we're using to kind of.
I don't remember. That's
No, but this is good. This is good. I appreciate that. Well, it leads into my last question, which is one that we're using to kind of bookend our Black Visionary series. That where you stand right now, sir, you have more sunrises behind you than you have in front of you. So you're at this point where you can look back. You know, if we go 50 years out from now, and you're no longer with us. Just imagine. I'm thinking you're going to be here fighting the good fight, but just say you're not. What do you want people to say about, like, what do you want them to say about
me?
The work of Larry Gibson?
Whoa. I don't know what I wanted to say about me. I did about 30 years ago decide on what would be my kind of life guiding principle. There was a friend that helped me with that. It happened when I was asked to go into law teaching, and I'm trying to figure this out. And a man named Philip Marks says, you can't decide this until you figure out what do you want to do in life. And we wrestled with this for about a month, and I defined in 1971 that what I wanted to be was a just and learned man. And that's what I tried to be. And then about 9 years later, after being involved in these political campaigns, but never as the candidate, always as the campaign manager, I said, wait a minute, how does this fit into that? And I revised it, and I said that the other piece of it is I want to be a just and learned person, and I want to help other just and learned people succeed. Those have been the guiding principles of, and I hope that when I'm gone, that's what folks say, that he was a just and learned man, person.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Larry Gibson is a law professor, a lawyer, a political organizer, and a historian. He currently serves as a professor at the Francis King Carey School of Law in the University of Maryland, Baltimore. He's still practicing law. He's the principal advocate for the legislation that renamed Maryland's major airport, the Baltimore Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport, where I always fly into. And he published Young Thurgood, The Making of a Supreme Court Justice, back in 2012. He's working on his new book about Thurgood Marshall. Thank you so much, Professor Gibson, for the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dr. Kenny. Thank you.
And thank you, folks, for joining us for our Black Visionary series, Making Black America, for WEAA.